Hello, my name is Jack Honig, and my paper is titled Love Taboo, a look into interracial relationships during 16th century Europe. As Lady Gaga famously said, quote, "I want your love. Love, 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 I want your love," end quote. We see it every day, in movies, on TV, in the books we read. We live in a society that deems Taylor Swift being in love as breaking news. So, how could something as universal and relatable as love be considered taboo? Simply put, people fear what they don't understand, and when they have a certain idea engraved in their head, it can be difficult to understand. Such is the case for love between two people of differing races. Dictionary.com defines a taboo as prescribed by society as improper or unacceptable. When hearing that definition, many examples flow through my mind. Having sex with your sibling, same-sex couples, even strong female characters seem taboo, even in today's progressive society. It still seems like a lot of things aren't being brought to light because of the fear and lack of understanding. Why is being with someone that doesn't come from the same background as you unacceptable by society? This is a question that dates back probably to the beginning of mankind, but for the purposes of this paper, I've narrowed the knowledge search to the 1600s. Travel back from today's current state, and it is early 16th century. We find ourselves in England. King James has just come over from Scotland to take over for the deceased Queen Elizabeth, and now he's watching the premiere performance of Shakespeare's allegedly new play, Othello the Moor of Venice. As stated in the Bedford Introduction to Drama, quote, "There seems to have been a vogue for blackness in England," end quote. That's right, kids. Cultural appropriation was a big trend long before Katy Perry threw her designer kimono into the problematic ring. England was bursting with a desire for the exotic and different, and their fascination just so happened to be on a group of people known as the Moors. Moors were people with dark-colored skin, thought at the time to have originated from Africa. The Moor people were never really accepted by English society. They were alienated and even booted from the kingdom at one point. Which is why it's so interesting that Shakespeare, allegedly, not only named a whole play after a Moor character, but also set the central plot of the play around the effects of the relationship between Othello, a person of color, and Desdemona, a white girl. Technically, Desdemona is Italian, but that's not the point. The power dynamics in this play are really interesting. Throughout the play, you find yourself wondering who really has the control. Othello is a decently respected man. He's given the leadership over a fleet of Venetian armies, which is like a pretty big deal. At least big enough to further the jealousy of Iago, who wants pretty much everything Othello has. In an article entitled Power in Relation to Class, Gender, and Race in Othello, the author writes, quote, "This hatred and jealousy that Iago creates in Othello is achieved through impressive stories of Desdemona making him a cuckold. They enable Iago to bring out Othello's latent sensuality in a violent, jealous, and masculine form." End quote. Othello seems to be the one on top, but beneath him is Iago running around taking advantage of every chance he gets to sabotage his foe. And even though Othello ultimately kills both Desdemona and himself to beat Iago, one could argue that Iago is actually victorious from besting his enemy. The distribution of power in regards to race is also an interesting factor. Race is never fully addressed in this play. Yes, Othello exclaims, "I am black," and there are racial slurs littered throughout, but the basis of the plot really just seems to be how much trouble Iago and company can get the rest of the characters into. The aspect of race is almost an afterthought, and never fully elaborated upon, except to explain Othello's drastic actions. In an article titled Iago in Equivocation, The Seduction and Damnation of Othello, author R.M. Christophides tests the theory that the play is about race, and instead argues that the play is Shakespeare capitalizing off the popularity of Moor people. Christophides goes on to refer to A.C. Bradley, a literary scholar known best for his work on Shakespeare. Quote, "Bradley rejected the relevance of Othello's skin color in his essential character, but still ascribed to him traits associated in Shakespeare's time with the savagery of blackness," end quote. What I gather from this is that Othello isn't a narrative about race, but a possible satire of it. Othello killing himself at the end of the play by brutally stabbing himself is just showcasing the savage nature of more people. And how does this tie back into the idea of a taboo relationship? Othello literally murders Desdemona because he thinks she cheated on him. Othello's savage behavior perpetuates that all men of color have violent tempers and can't be trusted. Othello was well received with Elizabethan audiences. The aspect of race and the interracial relationship between Othello and Desdemona didn't cause any public outcry, which either says Elizabethan audiences were woke or extremely aloof. In 1994, director Ninagawa Yukio directed a production of Othello with an Asian cast. Even though the play had already been performed in Tokyo and other Japanese cities since 1903, Yukio still notes the production as a failure. A piece entitled Othello in Tokyo, Performing Race and Empire in 1903 Japan, written by Robert Tierney, quotes the director saying, quote, "The problem of discrimination in white society and the racial tensions between white and black people make it wrong for Japanese to produce," end quote. Tierney went on to write, quote, "According to this explanation, Othello is simply not intelligible to Japanese audiences because they lack any concrete experience of discrimination or racial tensions," end quote. Simply put, Japanese audiences couldn't enjoy Othello because Yukio believed they couldn't relate to the racial themes. But race isn't a central part of the play, in my opinion. The relationship between Othello and Desdemona is. Elizabethan audiences followed the story and understood it, even though it was something they weren't accustomed to, because the themes of love and revenge are much more universal and far more prevalent in the play. The relationship between the couple is never brought up as being problematic or taboo, not because it isn't insignificant, but because it's simply a topic that has and continues to make people uncomfortable. Seeing a black man in love with a white woman, or vice versa, and them having a functional relationship is intentionally ignored, but the second the person of color in the relationship behaves savagely, that's when the relationship is brought to light. In 1967, there was a Supreme Court case. The case was between Richard and Mildred Loving versus the state of Virginia. Richard Loving was a white man, and Mildred was an African-American woman. The case was extremely controversial at the time because of the laws making it literally illegal for white people and people of color to marry or take part in any sexual activity together. The Supreme Court ruled in favor of the couple and ended all race-based marriage restrictions. The case was a landmark in civil rights history, so why is it I never knew about it until a movie came out about it last year? I am slightly to blame for not going out and researching things myself, but why is this something that can't be taught in schools? Because it's so taboo? Because people wouldn't understand? The 2017 thriller Get Out literally satirizes the idea of an interracial couple. It took the taboo subject matter, and made it universally and unapologetically accessible to everyone, and it was one of the most popular films of the year. Shakespeare, or whoever wrote Othello, didn't set out to tell a story about something taboo. I think they wanted to write about humans. Maybe I'm giving them too much credit, and maybe they were just capitalizing off the intrigue of the people of the time, but I really think they were just trying to tell an epic story with real people. The feelings each character experienced, love, jealousy, anger, these are all such universal ideas. Sure, the play magnifies those feelings by like 100, but they're still relatable. People are ready to hear these stories about people. Even if they don't admit it, they've been ready since the 1600s. It's time to start talking and telling. Thank you.